Thank you very much for that very nice introduction. And but I just wanted to, I shouldn't add anything to that because it was such a nice list. But I wanted to say two things I wanted to add, just because a lot of that stuff was up here, and I want to make sure that you folks know about two other things that is kind of more related to this audience. One, I just finished this morning teaching my introduction to sociology class at NYU with 300 students. So I am very much doing what you're doing. And also not on that...
Can you repeat the number of students you have?
I'm afraid I don't want to get into resource issues, class size issues here. There is 60 A's actually. But also the other thing that's not on the list is before I was a professor, I was in Oakland, California, teaching public schools, a high school public school for 6 years. And so I don't want you to think that kind of my experiences as an educator is so far removed from such a description might suggest. Now, however, what I'm coming here to talk to you about today is not my lived experiences as an educator, but rather a project that is social science from start to finish. And you'll see that as I present. This is a systemic study of the state of undergraduate education today in U.S. schools, and we identify that by using systematic social science methods, as you'll see. Getting started here, I'm presenting today, but Josipa Roksa is a co-author of mine and contributed equally to this book. She's also one of your colleagues here, Tanya, in the sociology department. Josipa is also a co-author of Tanya's on other work. The project was funded by a large number of foundations. And a large, how do you do this work? I'm here, Josipa's name is on it, but really it was built by a much larger edifice of research students doing the work. They co-authored some of the chapters and they're acknowledged as such in here. 24 colleges and universities opened their doors to us and gave the tests that the CLA test, which I'll tell you about, to the students. They partnered with us. The Council for Aid to Education developed the test, scored it for us. So our names are here, but it's social science. It's really, it's a collective product. Now I will talk today, summarize the book, and it's nicely here for sale, and I'm happy to sign them after, but that's, the book came out last January. It was on the student's experience for the first 2 years of college. By the time the book came out, we had data on all 4 years of college experiences, and simultaneously released a report that gave the full 4 years. That's available on our website. I'll show you that later for free. And then since then, we've continued to follow these kids that graduated in 2009 and now for 2 years have attempted to make transitions during this very, very difficult economic period that we're living in. And so we'll talk about the book, but then we'll talk about the full 4 years of data that's not in the book, and then we'll talk about how the students are faring 2 years out, 2011. We surveyed them in the spring. We interviewed them over the summer. So you'll be way past the book by the time this is over. Now I'm going to focus today on 4 key questions, just so you know where we're heading. One, and feel free to interrupt me at any time. One, the first basic question, are students improving their critical thinking, complex reasoning, and writing skills in college? Certainly that's not the only thing colleges and universities do. Students learn other things, subject-specific knowledge. We're not going to measure that. But these things are very important. These higher order skills, critical thinking, complex reasoning, and the ability for written communication. These are the generic skills that are part of college, no matter what you major in, that go with an individual from job to job, occupation to occupation, industry to industry. You can use them throughout your life, including participating as a citizen in a democratic society. These are key critical skills. Now, I didn't look at the York website before I got here, but I bet you've got a mission statement that mentions these. Most colleges do. Second, I'm a sociologist whose work is focused on inequality. And so I'm very interested in kind of inequality in learning outcomes. And so sociologists talk about them as ascribed characteristics, characteristics ascribed to people at birth, race, gender, social class background, things that you don't have control over, you're born with them, and that they affect your life course outcomes. So we're interested in kind of the inequality in college learning outcomes too. There's a lot of discussion of that in the book. The media accounts did not really pick up on that as much, but it's certainly a central concern of Josipa and mine. Third, this is kind of a key question for this audience. What factors help people learn more or less? There's variation in these learning outcomes. So how do you help some students? What are the contexts, the learning experiences that lead some students to gain more on this measure than others? This is the central question for practice. What can we do to help improve student learning? And then finally, I said I would ask, tell you a little bit about how the youth are doing today, how these college graduates are doing today, 2 years out. Now, I'll do one other thing in today's talk that's not really a research question. At the end, I have a few slides on what colleges and universities can do to kind of address these issues. And the truth is, I'm a social scientist. I have no particular expertise on that. You really have to have a discussion with each other about what can be done to improve practice on your own campus. However, having given this talk again and again, people always ask, well, tell us, what can we do? And so I've got some ideas here, and you're free to consider them and take them again. The stuff that comes before is social science. The other stuff is just my best ideas and thoughts on it. And so feel free to dismiss it if you think it's wrong-headed. Okay, now to answer these questions that we mentioned before, we had to do something different than other education researchers that are working, for example, on elementary and secondary schools. In elementary and secondary schools, the federal government creates national probability data sets. They follow 14,000 kids, 15,000 kids. Every 5-10 years, they follow them through school. They give them surveys. They measure their test scores, and make that available to social scientists to figure out what affects learning. It doesn't exist in higher education. No one has, the federal government has not been interested in following kids through colleges and universities, measuring their learning outcomes. So we had to do it ourselves. We have a design that looks like what other folks have done in elementary and secondary education. It's longitudinal. We follow the same kids over time. They start college, all four-year colleges, in fall 2005. We measure them again in spring 2007, again in spring 2009, measure them with the test, but also with surveys, asking them what they're doing. We collect their transcripts, look at what courses they're taking, and then we did these 2 follow-ups. It's a large-scale study, 24 diverse four-year institutions. These institutions were public and private. We've got some elite residential liberal arts colleges, but we also have large public flagship research universities. We have historically black colleges and Hispanic serving institutions in the data set. It's quite diverse, but although it's diverse and there's large numbers of students, first caveat, it is not a national probability sample. It is not a random sample of schools nor is it a random sample of students. At the back of the book, we compare our students and our schools to the national sample, and we believe it's largely representative, with two exceptions to keep in the back of your mind. First exception, gender. Because our study was voluntary, we got the kids in the beginning. They had to stay and volunteer to keep taking these tests and surveys. Guess what? We've got many more female students than male students. That's a separate talk I can come back to. But female students are more willing to kind of comply with kind of school expectations and school requests and what have you. So we have about, our sample is somewhere around 70% female. It should be, even with the disparities in education day, it should only be around 57–60%. So more women than men makes us very careful. We don't want to say a lot about gender differences because our sample, we don't know what's going on there. The other kind of caveat here would be we looked at the students' ability at the top and the bottom to make sure the schools were all supposed to get random samples of kids. But could we trust that? Maybe some schools wanted to game the system a little bit, just get kids at the top. So when we looked at it, the top half looked just the way it should. There wasn't just the best students that were put in front of us. However, the bottom 25% of the sample in terms of initial test score kind of drops out and disappears from our study. This could be because they dropped out of school. This could be because they had work. This could be because they're struggling so much with their classes they don't have time for this study. But keep in mind that bias. And that bias means that the kids at the bottom who are struggling the most are not here as much as they should be. So the picture you're going to get is going to be exaggerated upward. It's going to be more, if there's academic rigor going on, it's probably being exaggerated here. And in fact, the story is going to be told is that there's a lot of kids not experiencing academic rigor. If we had the kids on the bottom, it would be even worse. We have a breadth of information: family background, high school information, college experiences, college transcripts, and the CLA thing, the Collegiate Learning Assessment. Let me tell you what that is, since that's our measure, and some of you are not familiar with kind of how critical thinking, complex reasoning, and written communication is attempting to be measured by this instrument called the Collegiate Learning Assessment. I'm a sociologist. This was developed by psychometricians at Rand and Stanford. It's arguably the state-of-the-art measure, although it's like all measures of learning, it's limited, it's imperfect. We're the first to admit that. Its distinguishing characteristics. First, it's a direct measure. It's a direct measure of learning, and that's an important piece of information because the research that came before us in higher education was by and large based on student self-reports. Kids would finish college and university and you'd ask them in a survey, how much do you think you learned? And guess what? This is America. We all think they learned a lot, right? We learned 85–90% will say that they learned a lot in college and university, and they'll also tell you they're quite satisfied and happy with their experiences there. Based on those self-reports, people have been going to the higher education community and saying, in order to improve those self-reports, you have to do these things. And these things tended to be about social engagement. The more you got kids involved with each other, hanging out together in clubs, volunteer groups, working in groups and so on, the more they said they learned a lot. The more they said they learned a lot. But there's no direct measure of learning. We argue that the reason you're getting that relationship in that past data is because kids who say, I'm not sure I learned a lot, are the more introverted kids who aren't very socially engaged. The socially engaged act of volunteering, I'm in clubs, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. Oh yeah, I learned a lot. The correlation is not based on really measuring what you're trying to measure here. And we don't find any evidence that social engagement is related to learning in our study. We actually find the opposite. If anything, it's negatively related. Next, the measure it's not a multiple choice measure. And we say that because there are other instruments out there, like many standardized tests, fill in the bubbles. They give them questions, and they attempt to measure the bubbles. They attempt to measure these skills. You can measure critical thinking and complex reasoning with multiple choice tests. If you do, you end up getting results very similar to ours. There's a study down in Wabash. You can find it online that Charlie Blake and Ernest Pascarella have led. They're finding results pretty much identical to ours with the multiple choice indicator. The CLA is not. The CLA instead does something I like very much as a faculty member, that it gives students a set of documents and asks them to perform a task with it. To read a set of documents, think critically about them, synthesize information about them, and write something based on them. Not a simple task, not a simple task, but exactly the kind of task you'd expect kids to do better, no matter what their major is, as they move through college and university. Let me show you what one of those prompts looks like, and then we'll finish with the setup and get to the findings. Okay? Oh, one other thing. It's used, this CLA measure is being used in other settings. The voluntary system of accountability, 300 colleges and universities are using it and reporting them online. The OECD in Paris, I'm sure you're familiar with the test of math and science performance in junior high and grade school, PISA and TIMSS, where the US comes out around here. 2016, there's going to be a study of college kids, international cross-national comparison. And they're going to be using this CLA, a modified version of this CLA, to measure these skills in cross-nationally. Here's an example of what this kind of performance task would be. It's all computer-based. Students are get in front of a computer. They're given a prompt like this. It says something like, you're working for someone. They're all based on kind of things you might do after you graduated, different types of jobs you might have. So you're working for someone, and they're about to buy this small plane, and the small, to help with sales and marketing, corporate sales plane, corporate jet. A plane just like it crashes, and your boss says, here's a set of documents. Should we go ahead and buy that plane or not? Here's the federal accident report. Here's some newspaper articles. Here's some email correspondences between me and the person selling the plane, who wants to sell us the plane, and so on. Look at these documents and write me a memo telling me whether we should go ahead and buy this plane or not. Not a simple task, not a simple task. But again, the kind of task that captures these things, critical thinking. All that information is not the same, right? An email correspondence between you, your boss, and the guy trying to sell you the plane, you have to think critically about. Well, you have to think critically about everything, right? You have to synthesize information across, take information from different sources, and then you have to write an argument based on it, a logical argument that uses evidence, just the way you teach it in a class. Not an easy thing. There's more information here on this CLA website on the bottom that the Council for Aid to Education developed. Now again, all measures of this stuff are imperfect and limited. We're not measuring everything. This measures and imperfectly captures what we're trying to measure, but it's arguably a pretty good indicator out there. It's a state-of-the-art indicator for what we're trying to get at. And again, if you use multiple choice indicators, you find the same thing. Okay, now that we've kind of done that setup, I can get to the findings in the book. Are there any questions on kind of the backgrounds first?
Just a very quick one. One says air swift and the other says swift air. Is that a trick or a mistake?
These are from our PowerPoints, not from them. So where it says air swift, and I think that's just a typo from Swift Air, right? Swift Air. Yeah, I think they're called Swift Airs, not Air Swifts. Okay, I'll fix that one. You're the first person to catch it. I've been all over giving this talk. Thank you.
Is there any allowance?
But the bigger point is these aren't trick questions. I mean, they're not designed to be tricks. They're designed to be
No, I think it's a great
capture. You know, the attempts to capture that. Yeah.
The allowance for or modification of the materials for non-native speakers, or is it the same for everybody?
It.
Do you have information on how long non-native speakers have been living in the U.S.?
Yes, okay. So there's two questions here. Kind of one, how do non-native kids do, particularly kids with language difficulties? We asked them that in the surveys. Are you foreign born? What was the language at home? Those things are related to test score, to the performance on this. The second question is, does the Council for Aid to Education have a version of this in different languages? For our purposes, the project we partnered with, they didn't. It was all English-based, but they are developing those for that international project. So, but good point. But good.
We're kind of international here.
I understand. Yeah, yeah. So you'd have to.
Just as a reference, bilingual speakers usually have the executive function more developed than any other. If you're monolingual, because you're constantly making decisions from one
Yes.
language to the other.
Yeah.
So it really depends.
Yeah. Well, and also the thing, what we know is immigrant students are, tend to be very highly motivated and hardworking. And so some of these patterns we see here, of the lack of effort and work might look very different. So it goes in all sorts of different directions. But you're right, the instrument itself is one that's grounded in a specific language. Now, but let me say one other piece here. Our approach in the book to measurement is that we do what's called value-added measurement, where you measure the kid at one point of time, and then you measure them again at the second point of time. And so we're much less interested in kind of where kids start from than whether they grow. And it's not, it's true that a kid, if English isn't their first language, they might start lower regardless of their executive function because of the language piece of this. But you'd expect them to be able to grow the same amount. Was there another question? Yeah.
It was an early slide. It's about the samples. So
Yeah.
there are 2 samples. I just want to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. I skipped over that. So the book is written on this sample, the first 2 years of college. I'm going to present findings on the full 4 years of college. Now, you might ask, wait, how did this magic happen? How does your number of schools go up? I've never seen that in a study before. It's because of the following reason. The Council for Aid to Education started this project without us, without the Social Science Research Council. They were just measuring kids. How did they do on this test score? And at the end of it, they were going to say College A is better than College B in terms of getting these growth. And we found out and we said, hold on, that's not the best question. Let's give them a survey and collect their transcripts and see what factors affect learning at the individual level. And so we came in the first 2 years, we had convinced 24 of the schools to join us, of about, there were about 3 dozen. By 2009, we had convinced 5 more that had started in 2005, didn't open their doors to us in 2007, opened to their doors to us in 2009. We lose some students over time, of course, because kids are dropping out of college. Also, if they transfer to other colleges, we had no capacity, no resources to follow them, like a federal government would do in a random sample. Okay? Oh, ready now? Okay. So, in terms of findings, let me do the next two slides I think are the most important of the whole talk. So I'm setting them up for you, okay? This one, okay. This is the first one I think is the most important based on our survey. Surveys of kids. We surveyed them at the end of their sophomore years in college and asked them about the semester before, which would be the fall of their sophomore year in college. And we asked them, the surveys at the back of the book, we asked them, turned out to be a naive social science question. We asked them, how many courses are you taking where you wrote more than 20 pages over the course of the semester? How many courses? And we asked how many courses. Again, we're naive social scientists. We weren't out there to kind of get higher education. Like my whole life is an educator, and I work in higher education. The data came back so skewed to zero. 50% of the kids said none. I don't have any class where I was asked to write more than 20 pages over the course of the semester. We also asked them, how many courses did you take where you read more than 40 pages per week on average? More than 40 pages per week on average. And again, the data came back with all these zeros. 32% of the students said, no course. I don't have a single course where I'm asked to read more than 40 pages per week on average. Lots of students, not every student, not all the students, but lots of students are finding ways to navigate through college and university today with little asked of them. And we believe that's the case in part, well, one, we allow it. We have courses that allow them to do this. They can find where these courses are. They know they can use the social media and find where are the programs in colleges and universities where they ask little but they give us the A's, where are the courses, where are the faculty. They know how to do that. And we've set it up so they can do that. They can do that. Not everyone, but again, about half to a third of the students are going through college and university with kind of very little, little academic treatment, academic rigor asked of them. Now you can combine it to both and neither and so on. Here's the other slide that I think really kind of sums up the whole thing. And that is, what are they doing? What are full-time college students doing today? Then I'll get to your question. And this is based on their self-reported time use. It's largely consistent. It's actually a little bit exaggerated from the Bureau of Labor Statistics also has a survey of college students' time use, where the average time on a school day is something like 3 hours of academic time, half in classes, half studying, would be a college student today. We're getting something very similar to that. At best, 15 hours attending class and in lab. That's if they show up all the time. Some of my students don't. Maybe it's different here. But if they are showing up, it's 15 hours. They report studying 12 to 13 hours per week. Full-time college students, 12 to 13 hours a week. A third of that, they say, is studying in groups, studying with their friends, which we'll find out later on doesn't track with learning outcomes at all. Those 8 hours a week, they study alone, 8 hours a week. And even what is studying alone today, like the way I've think about it, studying alone today, a little different than when we studied alone, maybe some of your old folks like me. They're studying alone, you're never alone. You're always plugged in. And so, but even that, the studying alone is only 8 hours a week. We had 36% of our sample said we study alone 5 or fewer hours per week. 5 or fewer hours per week, less than an hour a day. And we had their transcripts, right? We're like, oh my gosh, these kids are going to be really doing bad, really poorly. No, remember the last slide? They're not asked to read and they're not asked to write. They are getting 3.2 GPAs, right? Halfway between a B and a B+. They're doing fine. Okay? Large numbers of kids going through college, working very little, able to get through and make progress in terms of getting a degree with little asked of them academically and little effort put in. Yeah.
You mentioned this, but your distribution of students according to major,
Yeah.
is that rather broad?
It is broad, and in the book we break it up by majors and show how in some places they study more than others. Some majors study more than others. The reading and writing requirement, math and science majors, you're not going to expect them to be very high on that, but they could be getting academic rigor elsewhere. And if you look at those kids in those majors, their hour studying is actually the highest place in the university. And they do very well on this CLA measure. Their growth is very high, not because they're not getting the reading and writing, but they're getting academic rigor, they're studying hard. And so I'm not going to do much of that in the talk, but in the book we break it up by majors. We also break it up by the selectivity of the college. And so we show highly selective, selective and less selective institutions, and you can see how this stuff varies there as well. Sir?
First question about the previous slide. There seems to be an assumption here that you equate rigor with the number of pages written and number of pages read. Do you have any?
Well, so again, I would say that's not true everywhere. In math and science, you would not expect rigor to track with reading and writing requirements in this way. We know that these are just kind of rough proxy measures. They are used in other surveys, the National Survey of Student Engagement. And so we took off-the-shelf measures to try and track this. But I absolutely agree with you that alone, you can't assume that these measures capture academic rigor perfectly.
And the second question with respect to the following slide.
Yeah?
The sample, 51% of students, I'm sorry, the 51% of students' time is spent socializing and only 9%, and only 7%
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
How representative is it of the contemporary student? It seems to be like totally skewed, at least in terms of our student body or any kind of public school.
No, well, if it actually does not look that different than the national data on college, on full-time college and university students, four-year students. I will be the first to concede the point that your students might be working many more hours. But by and large, college university students are not working that many hours. They're working about 5 more hours than they did in 1960. But the vast majority of them are not working more than 15 hours a week. Again, it might not be the case here. I'm not making claims that it is. But by and large, if we're talking about four-year students in the country. Did you have a
question was, why did you choose to ask about the 20 pages written in the 4
Yeah,
years?
those were admittedly arbitrary arbitrary cutoffs. Thank you. And we chose them because as social scientists, you borrow existing instruments to make sure the data you're collecting isn't just kind of off base. So these were existing instruments that were from either the National Survey of Student Engagement or the work out of UCLA, the Higher Education Research Institute. I'm the first to concede that they're arbitrary cutoffs and are very imperfect measures of what we're trying to capture. But they do tell us something.
The questions about pages read and
Yeah.
Pages written, did you ask that again longitudinally?
I did. We did.
And did you find a difference when they got further along their education?
Yeah, no, we know from the other surveys where freshmen, and not ours, but from other surveys out there in the published research, freshmen and seniors, the sophomore year is not that atypical on this. It's not the fact that seniors, by the time they're seniors, they're all doing this. Quite the contrary. They're not doing it any more than they were in their sophomore year. And in fact, one of the disturbing things out there in the literature is that the longer students are in college and university, the more their academic motivation declines. So if you survey them about what their motivation is about doing well in school and working hard and those sort of things, the longer they're exposed to us, the more that declines, even for the kids that stay and persist in college.
My question is about quality.
Yeah.
So, for instance, studying can mean anything.
Yeah.
Right? So are you asking specific questions about what studying is? And are you asking specific questions about what socializing is?
Yeah.
Because students can do it in socializing,
Yeah.
but it's what they're doing in this activity.
Yeah, so in the studying question, we ask questions, are you studying alone, or are you studying with groups? The socializing is a residual category here, but there is time use stuff. Stephen Brint, a sociologist at UC Riverside, has published a bunch of papers online based on University of California students, and that suggests that they're socializing 3 times the amount of time that they're studying. And let me show you another slide on the time use, give you a sense that it wasn't always this way. It wasn't always the case here. This is from work by Philip Babcock and Mindy Marks. Babcock is a labor economist at UC Santa Barbara. This paper is online on his website. He went back to every time use survey back to the 1920s, where full-time college students were asked, how many hours are you studying? All the way back to the 1920s. And pulled up that survey, and then you can see how does that change over time. Now, I didn't put it up here, the 1920s to the 60s, because it stays the same. A full-time college student says, I'm working about 35 hours, 40 hours a week academically. 15 in class, 25 hours studying. Then, in 1960, something happens. And basically what happens is the amount of hours a full-time college student spends studying drops in half. And these are other surveys, Project Talent, National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, the UCLA one, NESE. It's consistent in all the data. This is a very consistent pattern. You rarely see in social science survey results like consistently doing that move. But kids today, they study half the amount of time than they did in 1960. It's gone down from about 25 to about 12 or 13. Now, I said about 5 of those hours of the 12 or 13 is more working, more employment today than in the past. But there's still, that doesn't account for the majority of it. Something else is going on. And just to be a little bit provocative here, if I graphed something else, if I graphed, for example, what students expect their grades to be in college and university. In 1971, a survey started asking them that question. And 27% of kids in 1971 said, I expect to get a B average or better in college. 27%, very brave, confident kids. Today, that's up to 70%. And we don't disappoint them. We don't. The grades are moving in the other direction. It is getting easier and easier, and as it gets easier and easier to get through college and university, the effort goes down and down. Now, it's more complicated than that. There's changes in technology, changes in student composition, but that's basically the trends are there no matter how you look at it. The Babcock and Marks piece I really recommend, because it's individual level data, they're able to break it down by group, by social background, by majors that the kids are in. Doesn't matter. White kids, same as African American kids, same as math majors, same as political science majors. It doesn't matter. Elite institutions, non-elite institutions, the trend is all the same, down, down, down. And it's down, down, down because something has changed in the organizational culture of higher education. And that's what a lot of our discussion in the book is, that something has changed in how we do this, how we do our work, and how students understand what they are doing here. how we understand what we're doing here and how they understand what they're doing here. Did I answer your question? Or?
I was just wondering about all the relevant controls.
Yeah.
Spoke
I spoke to it. These are just the trend lines of every student surveyed, but in the paper he disaggregates it, like I said.
Do you have information on, say, corporatization of the university or some of these other sociological trends or attitudes about self-esteem, maintain self-esteem?
Yeah.
Recommend some of the causal, potential causal mechanisms, I guess?
We haven't really done that. We do at the individual level in our book look at the variation in how many hours students study compared to their traits. And I said it varies by major. Some majors are more rigorous than others. It varies by social background less than you'd expect. There are really no race differences in kind of the hours studying. The effort is about the same. It does vary by social background a little bit, the hours studying, parents' education level. But that's all in the book. You can pull that stuff up.
Can I
Oh, yes, sir.
For 1 quick minute?
Yes.
I've got to go to my second 12 p.m. So
Okay.
I formally welcome you. I've Law Griffith Provost.
Oh, thank you very much.
And just make a couple of quick remarks.
Sure.
I want to begin with the CLA. Colleagues other than those who arrived this year will have known about 3 letters called CPE. You all love those 3 letters, right? Well, the university and that was an exit test, college proficiency exam. The university took a decision a year ago to abolish the CPE. But it's not the end of testing. This morning I sent to the deans or director of testing and institutional research a report that the University Task Force on Assessment just completed recommending CLA for CUNY. So CLA is coming to a place near us, first point. And CLA has been around for a long time, as Richard quite rightly said. I was at another institution in Virginia where we used it. So we have an opportunity to embrace CLA. I sat there thinking that perhaps we can call this year NYU at York year. Because in the spring, I hosted one of your colleagues who is a good friend of mine, Pedro Noguera. Pedro was a keynote speaker at the CUNY conference. We have an annual City University of New York Gen Ed conference. Every year a different college hosts it. And I asked Pedro, he did a superb job in doing the keynote speech. But I'm going to leave you a copy of this. You see in the program, I use your book. I'm about 80% of your book, and I use something in here as part of an epigraph to make the point in my message. And the point I was trying to make is twofold. That Academically Adrift is really an indictment about us as colleges and universities. And it is no longer appropriate for us to point the finger at students, politicians, whether state or federally. There's something in the organizational and institutional cultures, and quite rightly so, as you said, not just at public schools or urban schools, it's across the United States. So if you haven't had a chance to have him get more royalties, I would say read the book. It's a powerful indictment about the way we do business, and it's a wake-up call about the need for us to do differently. Now, the reason I stopped your book is because I picked up Amikaminit's DIY University. And that has been challenged. It's the second book, if you haven't had a chance to read. If we're serious about the business of higher education as an enterprise, Anna Kamenitz's DIYU is also a powerful wake-up call to us. Just want to make 2 other quick observations. First is to thank Jaudan for agreeing to be interim director for this year and for getting Richard to come. I really want to encourage us to see this year at our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning as a year of outcomes. And I'd like to encourage us to think of just one simple project. What might each of us do differently coming to the CETL events in our classes either in spring 2012 or beginning fall 2012. We've had a wonderful opportunity for the last 4 years to have sealed events, but I don't have a sense as to whether the input side and the throughput side is translating into outcomes where we're doing something different in our classes, where the pedagogy is being modified, where something different is happening. Maybe it's happening that I just don't know. And I would welcome hearing feedback to Yaodan of how is it you've used something that you heard or learned at a CETL event to do something differently in your class, whether it's in the design of your syllabus, whether it's in an assignment or a set of assignments that you do, whether it's taking a research project and making the pedagogical part of what you do something that you want to do as a research project. So if we can just embrace and own not just the input side, hearing the lectures, having the conversations, but embrace taking ownership for the outcomes that are different. And so be able to make a difference not only we know in our classes, but share with other colleagues the kind of differences we make. So thanks for coming. Have a wonderful time. We tried to order caviar, Richard, but they're all out of caviar, so we decided to go with a pizza.
Thank you.
I'll leave this for you for your later reading.
Well, thank you very much for adding in the relevant pieces here, because the whole reason why I'm out there doing this is to kind of help inform your work, so that you guys can think through these problems, and so it's great that the provost is here, being part of that dialogue and pushing those issues as well.
Since you're quoting Babcock and going a little bit
Yeah.
beyond your own study,
Yep.
Is the trend international or just American?
We don't know that. We don't know that. The 2016 data will have cross-national data on measuring learning, and it will also measure things like hours studying. There has been a study following the Babcock thing in Germany that suggests that there's downward trends there also. There's lots of concerns in, some surprising maybe for this audience, in some of the Southeast Asian countries that have expanded higher education so dramatically. Korea, for example, it's above 50% now, 50, 60% get four-year college degrees. And there's a lot of discussion about has the quality of what a higher education, has it deteriorated as they've expanded so dramatically. So, but these are all, the German, there's actually research on that. The other ones are just kind of speculation. I think it's critical research that needs to be done.
Yes, regarding to what you were saying before about the models, I think there has been a big shift towards a business model.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, because the students see themselves as a client,
Yeah.
as a customer. Like, I cannot forget, like one time, like a couple of years ago, I had a student that told me, I can't believe I paid hundreds of dollars for a D.
Yeah.
What? Okay, maybe you should. Like,
Right.
They see themselves as a customer, so that's
Yes.
the problem. And the whole university system is so cash-strapped that we kind of go along
Well,
with it.
the interesting thing is I agree that we've moved to a model where the student is the consumer and the client. The interesting thing is it's not as simple as being cash-strapped, because you see even at the higher ends of the more elite ends of higher education, the student is the consumer and the client. And so where is money spent? It's spent on the new gym, the student center building, the student services very broadly, where the number of full-time faculty in colleges and universities down, down, down across the board. So it's a broad trend, more adjuncts and so on. The number, there is growth in colleges and universities in the student support sectors, quasi-professional staff that are hired to take care of the needs of students. One could fast forward those trends, and if faculty and student learning isn't at the center of college and university like I think it should be, fast forward the trends, and what you might have is the following model in the not too distant future. Instruction can all be outsourced and done online with learning modules, And colleges and campuses become nothing but the support staff, the quasi-professionals, keeping the kids in their dorms and in their registering for the classes and financial aid. And I don't think that's so remote a possibility. I think that's where the trends are going. And so part of what we're arguing in the book with these measures is that if we are going to take seriously that academic rigor and that we should care about undergraduate education, that putting undergraduate education in the center of what colleges and universities also puts faculty in the center. And so that's part of the message of the book that you'll see. And there's a lot about kind of how the changes in organizational culture that you've talked about.
Two questions. One is, are there studies that show different results from these? That is, that things are improving. And the second question is, in your study or any other, are there what so-called best practices? Are there models that you know of that you studied where it reverses this?
Yeah. Okay. So I really don't know any studies out there that suggest that colleges and universities are actually getting better at what they're doing and students are working harder and learning more. It's, to my mind, completely, I can't think of a single study out there that shows that. It all suggests these kind of downward trends in kind of amount of critical thinking, complex reasoning gains, hours studying, all the measures seem to be pointing in the downward direction, albeit that the data longitudinally is imperfect. What can we do about it? There's two things. One is there are a lot of best practices out there based on these self-reported learning, like get the kids engaged in groups socially. I don't buy that. So they're based on research, but I think the research is wrong, is not supportable. I do have some things to say. Let me get to that, okay? That's where we're going next. So, okay, the CLA gains. Notice that this isn't what I thought were the most important slides. We already did that, the academic rigor slides. You can measure this stuff, and you measure the stuff if the students, 36% of the students are studying 5 or fewer hours per week, 36%. And 50% don't have a course where they're writing 20 pages, 32%. I don't care what measure you put in front of them, you're going to show large numbers of them not gaining. And even if they are gaining, most of them are going to be gaining very small. Now, not everyone. We found some kids working hard, taking rigorous courses, learning a lot. There's that piece of the book, too, that's in there. But I'm worried about this other piece, that there's large numbers that are going through the motions, not doing much, and they don't move on this test. And they don't move on this test, they don't move on other tests either. And again, go to the Wabash study. Charlie Blake, B-L-A-I-C-H, Ernest Pascarella. It was published in Change magazine. It's a magazine on higher education. In last spring, it came out after our book. They said, okay, the Academically Adrift book, we got this multiple choice measure. Let's see, we have 3,000 kids we're following in different colleges and universities. Let's see what we find. We find the same thing. So, but again, that's not surprising. That's what you get if that's the quality of academic education. Let me move forward to what does track with learning. So first of all, faculty expectations. This is something that we've known long time ago in K-12 education, that students respond to the expectations of the faculty. And so we asked the students in their surveys, do faculty have high expectations for students like you? Do faculty have high expectations for students like you? And if they did, control for everything else, control for social background, control for prior tests, they will grow more on the test than otherwise. They will show more gains. This is a consistent thing in our finding. We asked them other questions. We asked them a question about spending time with faculty, interacting with kids. Didn't matter. Expectations, though, did consistently track. Reading and writing requirements. Remember, we asked that those all crude if not vulgar questions about 20 pages of writing more than and 40 pages of reading. I'm the first to say, hey, don't distill what I do down to that. However, even with those crude measures, those kids that did both learned, moved more on this test. And these are, again, value added, controlling for the past experiences, controlling for student characteristics like prior SAT scores, gender, race, social class, the language ability, the special, the non-English language, the foreign students, and so on. Very important slide here. Again, challenging the social engagement literature out there. We found hours studying. The more students said they studied, the more they said they studied, the more hours studying, the more their scores go up. Controlling for their past school, shocking. Kids study, they learn. However, this maybe is surprising here, studying with peers. The more they said they spend hours studying with peers, their scores went down. It's not just neutral, down. Now, that doesn't mean I'm an enemy of group work, getting kids working together, active learning. Those things could work. Those things model could work. But as students today do studying in groups, it doesn't work. Right? They get together and something's going on. And I think what goes on here, this is hours they say they spent in fraternities and sororities. It goes the same, the trend lines are the same. Hours studying in groups is the same as hours being spent in a fraternity and sorority. The more you do it, the less not only the less gains you're going to see, you're actually seeing declines in the test scores.
Do we have a chicken-egg issue here, though? I mean, in terms of the students who are more inclined to do better, those that are studying alone versus those who are inclined to do less well studying in group?
Some kids get told to go to the fraternity randomly, and then you could definitively say that. This could be a story about sorting. And we're very careful in the book to say, we don't know it's not. All we can do as social scientists is control for prior ability, control for other things that might confound it, and tell you this picture which is descriptive. So these are the patterns. They're open to different interpretations. This is the college major, how different majors fare in this. Now, in the book, we go by each major and say how much reading and writing they do, how many hours studying they do. This is just the gains for CLA scores here. Now, this is definitely a picture, as the last question came, of sorting, right? Some students go into, the students that are going into math and science are different types of students than students that go into education and social work. So this could be driven largely by by selection. Nevertheless, again, and in the book we show how their experiences are different. There are some parts of the university where kids are gaining more on the CLA than others. And the simplest way to say it is it's the traditional arts and science core of the university. Social science, humanities, science, and math. That's where you're seeing the most gains. And other parts of the university, you see less of it. Now, that could be a story about sorting. You can't rule it out, but nevertheless, that's the pattern. Now, let's go to inequality in CLA performance. Remember, that was one of the research questions and one of my interests as a sociologist. What we find here is, this first one is by parents' education, where we compare kids with high school or less, parents high school or less, to parents graduate and professional degrees. And we start in 2005, these two types of kids, and then we see how they do in 2007. They're going up, both of the kids. 2009, they're going up, both the kids. And these are models that control for other things. How do we interpret that to mean? Kids, regardless of parents' education, are learning at roughly the same rates in colleges and universities today. Doesn't matter what your parents' education, you start off a little bit behind, not surprisingly, with the high school or less, but they're learning at the same rates. And colleges and universities can't be responsible for where the kids start, but they can be responsible for how much they learn. And this is kind of a more positive picture that they're learning at roughly the same rates, albeit maybe low on both. It doesn't matter where they're. Now the next one, the race slide, is less positive. And here we present just African American and white differences in the book. We also look at Hispanic and Asian differences, but these are the most pronounced and the ones I'm going to show you today. And again, we're not surprised that kids start off differently when they enter college, African American students and white students. The troubling piece, however, is African American students are learning at lower rates, particularly in the first 2 years of college and university, where there's virtually no change in their performance. And in the book, we kind of go into possible reasons for that and ways to think about it. But let me just say here that in K-12 education, we have a national discourse around closing the achievement gap and making sure that all kids learn. In higher education, I don't think we have that discourse. We might in some colleges and universities. You might be having that conversation here at your college. But by and large, in higher education, we don't have that discourse. And in many colleges and universities, you get a different message where the faculty are implicitly told, don't spend time on kids that are struggling. They'll pull you away from your research. Spend time on the most talented kids out there. That's where you get the positive feedback and rewarding experiences. And so if anything, the incentives are to make this thing worse. Now, what about institutional variation? Well, one thing you can do is in social science, you can partition the variance, see how much is across colleges and universities, how much is within colleges and universities. That is, how much of the difference in learning is within, how much is across. 23% of the difference is across institutions. Institutions matter. Some colleges and universities do a better job than others in producing these gains in the CLA. Producing climates also with more academic rigor. And we talk about that in the book. But notice the other piece. The majority of the difference in student gains are within a college and university. The majority are within. Based on that, it would be wrong-headed, we think, to go and for York to go racing around trying to figure out where are the other colleges and universities that are doing a better job. You'll find them. There are differences. There's more variation within. There are places that are exemplary at this college and university. I guarantee you that there's academic rigor and kids showing major gains in some programs in this college and university. And the other thing I would guarantee you is that there are other programs where none of that's happening. And so we argue based on that going to kind of an accountability framework, no child left behind, let's measure school performance, doesn't make sense if you really care about student learning. What you need to do is have an assessment culture within the institution where the college and university is self-assessing, figuring out where's the academic rigor, where is it not, how do we make sure learning occurs throughout the college and university. Now, this measure here, we didn't find it in the 2-year data in the book, but we do find it in the 4-year data. Some of that differences between colleges and universities is around selectivity. More select institutions, the kids are learning a little bit more. And they're learning a little bit more there because we think there's the climate, the peer climates, the academic rigor they're experiencing there. More faculty. For a combination of reasons. That is part of that institutional variation piece here, but it's only a part. There are differences across colleges and universities with the same selectivity of students.
Would you say then, given that the slide before about the variance, that the instrument or the tool that's used at CUNY is performance measurement, we have a series of performance measurements that go across the community colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And we're often comparing outcomes between one part of community to another part of community. I mean, that's kind of like
That's what they like to do.
measure of our success
Yeah.
or our failure
Yeah.
in comparison to our sister and brother colleges. So I guess the question is whether this finding
Yeah.
supports an argument that we really should be internally assessing and not comparing ourselves to the other community colleges.
Yes, that's exactly what I believe. Exactly what I believe. I think it's a much more useful exercise. That again, I guarantee you, there are programs here where students know they can go and get easy pass, easy grades, get a credential with very little work. And there are other places where they're holding the line and there's rigor and there's learning, measurable learning. Facing within and figuring out how to do that and how to get people to work together. So one of the problems today, of course, is that if students think that college and university is all about a credential, and they think, okay, I'm going to go, if it's just a credential, makes rational sense to go take the easy program, I'm going to get the credential. They move, the enrollments grow in certain majors that are easy. You hold the line, they shrink. The university rewards the growth. The incentives are towards the growth. The incentives are towards dumbing down the system. So you got to come together and say, okay, we can't solve this alone. We can solve it collectively. We can figure out what are some reasonable common grading standards and practices. One thing I've simple fix for a lot of this that I think colleges and universities should consider. College transcripts. You have the grade the kid gets in the course. Right next to it, you have the average grade of the students in the course. So you find out, is the kid really excelling, or is he excelling at figuring out where the easy courses are? So at the end, you have two summary grades, the grade point average and the courses they took. Very simple thing to do. Wouldn't cost a penny. But it could change kind of, employers could actually look at the transcripts, make sense of them today. Grad schools could look at them, make sense of them. So very easy thing to do that would level the playing field so you don't have enrollment shifts from hard graders to easy graders. No, that's fine.
In terms of explaining variance explained.
Yeah.
Did you have a model where you attempted to figure out how much of the variance is explained by how much reading you do, how much is and how much is explained altogether? Are we talking about just a little bit of effect size here, or are we talking about?
Well, in most education research, the effect sizes are always a little, especially when you only have little growth in the first place. However, there are significant effects that some things we find do matter, some things we find don't matter. Let me go back to them and I can try and talk about it in terms of effect sizes here. So notice here, these are the kids studying alone. Let's not go to 0. Let's make it more reasonable. From there, the 5 hours to 15 hours, right? So it goes from like 1140 to 1160, about a 20-point difference in the CLA. A standard deviation is 180. So it's like a 1/9 of a standard deviation, if that helps you think about it. Okay. Sir. Yeah.
Selectivity. Is the difference between the two in 2009 significantly
Yeah.
greater than the difference between the two?
I'm not showing you anything that isn't tested and statistically significant. Other than the parents' education one where I said, hey, there's no difference between the two.
You mean the difference between the two in 2009 is greater than the difference between the two in 2005?
The gains, this gain in the high selective institutions is significantly different than the gain in the low selective institutions.
So 2009 minus 2005 for those significantly different from 2009 minus 2005.
Yeah. And that's why in the book here, this finding is from the 4 years that In the 2-year data, we couldn't find significant evidence. There was some evidence, but it wasn't significant. And so we never in the book say, go into a highly selective institution, you're going to have more academic rigor and you're going to learn more. We say in the book, highly selective institutions, the kids have this academic rigor, less selective have this academic rigor, they study different rates and so on. Colleges and universities matter, but we never say in the book that go into a more selective institution because there wasn't significant evidence. Here there is. Sorry.
Just to follow up on that question, you have a power calculation for your expected effect size. I was just wondering how you determine how large the sample to make or whether we've seen effects.
Yeah, so this was this project was very much a convenience study, if you will, where it was an existing effort by the Council for Aid to Education that was in these 36 colleges and universities, just given the CLA, and like I said, they were going to say at the end, your college doesn't do as well as as college. And we said, hey, do social science. So we partnered in and said, let's survey them, and so we didn't do it from the start. Now, one of the advantages of that is if I was going to do it from the start, I would have needed millions and millions and millions of dollars to do this study. And we did this study on a complete shoestring, where we relied on the colleges and universities to keep the kids, to randomly sample the kids, to give them the test, to stay in touch with them. We only started talking to the kids now in 2000, directly after 2000, they graduated.
The reason I make the point is that you're making conclusions based on race and high and low.
Yeah, yeah.
Based on effect size that are like 1%.
Well, these.
And can be carried.
Yeah.
Very large.
So the technical response is from that is we clustered the the standard errors and the significance tests are all based on clustering to try and that this isn't a random sample in the population. It's in 24 institutions. We tended to be very kind of conservative in kind of our approach to all this stuff. However, I totally concede that the way to do this is a national probability data set that the federal government collects on kids and follows them over time and doesn't just give them the CLA, but gives them some tests on their subject-specific skills, some other tests. In fact, we wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where it concludes we need the federal government to collect nationally representative data. So I'm the first to concede that there are these, caveats, challenges, and so on with this. This is, this is imperfect social science, but it's the best we have yet.
How do you think about the implications of your research? Because you started out by talking about the life chances for individual learners, right? And so on the one hand, I feel very excited about a more rigorous learning environment for our students, but on the other hand, we do live in an economy where the credential is what matters.
Do we? Let me get to the next one. I think I'm going to address some of that. We don't have definitive address of that, but that's a totally reasonable question, right? So let me restate it a little bit. Do the things that we're talking about, academic rigor, learning in college, translate to anything in future life? Or maybe the kids are right. Maybe the kids are rational. It's all the credential. It's all social networking. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's how they're getting their jobs, through friendship networks, through college institutions. As a social scientist, I totally take that seriously. That this stuff that I care about, I'm a lifetime educator, academic rigor learning. This stuff may or may not matter. And so we're following the kids now to see whether it matters. I don't have definitive answers. The person in the back would say, you can never get definitive answers with your observational data anyway. But even once I'm comfortable of saying or controlling for everything. But you'll see some hints of some stuff in a slide or two. So another question.
I'm just wondering if there have been similar studies done in secondary school level.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, they're not coming to us in a vacuum.
Yes. Yeah, there's extensive work in elementary and secondary on the factors affecting learning. In fact, the methods we employ here are basically the statistical modeling is taken out of elementary and secondary education and brought in here. if the other point you're making is, does learning outcomes matter down the road? There's evidence that, yes, a little. So let me say it a different way. There's a book written by a bunch of Berkeley professors when I was a grad student called Inequality by Design. That was a critique of the bell curve study. The critique, remember the Herrnstein and Murray, the bell curve? And so it looks at kind of how, Herrnstein and Murray say it's all intelligence and that predicts everything. And the Inequality by Design book says, well, first of all, what you're calling intelligence is a test score measure when kids are age 14 to 22. That's not IQ, that's learning in schools. And, they demonstrate in the book that it's learning in schools. It's not innate IQ, if there is such a thing. The second thing the book says is how much do those test scores predict life course outcomes? And the answer there is a little, a little. It doesn't explain most of it. Most of it is other factors. But it is a significant factor. You can look at the book there for kind of concrete numbers. How are the kids faring today? Okay, we're all in this business because we care about the individuals. These are their statuses 2 years out. We're only surveying people who were still in the study in the senior year of the study, in part because when we started the project, we never asked them for permission to follow them up and stay in touch and so on. Those kids, a lot of them are back in attending full-time. Only about half of them got full-time employment, and a lot of them are either part-time employed or unemployed. About 7% are unemployed, 16% are part-time employed. A better way to see this is the following, I think. We asked them about their college loans. Large numbers of them have loans, 2/3 of them, and if they do have loans, their loans average $26,000. They also report they have $2,000 on their credit cards that were often used for educational expenses. This is a shocking one for many. 24% are back living at home with their families, right? Not surprising. If you can't, if you don't have a high-paying job, you can't find a high-paying job, and you got a lot of loans, and the government says you can't declare bankruptcy and walk away from those loans, they are back in living at home, 24%. It was 31% a year out, 24% 2 years out. More troubling still to me as an educator is the following. We also asked them about their kind of broader things. It's one thing, do you get a job, do you not get a job? The other thing is, do you demonstrate behaviors consistent with kind of adult responsibility, like democratic citizenship? Do you engage in behaviors that you're a college-educated graduate, you're part of a democratic society? A third of the kids said, 32%, when we asked them, do you read the newspaper in print or online? A third of them said monthly or never. Monthly or never. These are college graduates. We asked them a broader question. Do you discuss politics or public affairs with a friend, family, or colleague, in person, on the phone, or online? Very, very broad. Constructed to say, yes, of course I do that. 39% say no. We say monthly or never. These are kids who are by and large, not everyone, but large numbers, are disengaged. And the next slide, it tracks with what we've asked them to do in college and university. When you don't ask them to read and write and study in college and university, when you don't teach those dispositions, those character traits about how one should work in society, it tracks with what they end up doing. So this is just on our studying. The kids that said they studied 5 or fewer hours, more than half of them said, I read the newspaper in print or online. Kids that sped, on the other hand, said I studied more than 15 hours were much more likely to do studying. Now remember, from the Babcock research, it used to be that the average kid studying in colleges and universities was out here, 25 hours studying, right? 25 hours. I'm not going to make a causal claim. However, this is kind of very telling, right? And very troubling, right? Troubling to me. If part of the reasons why we're in here is to make the next generation that's going to be able to help our country think through these very difficult problems, how do you do that when you get these kind of differences?
Of course, it's very disturbing, and yes, of course, as educators, we have a responsibility to give our students a sense of civic responsibility and engagement. But how much can you divorce what goes on in the academy from the broader trends in society? Do you address that at all in the book?
We do.
Because,
yeah.
you know, one interacts with the
Absolutely.
other. And I know it goes beyond the scope of your research,
No.
but
So,
the society in which we live, the nature of the media, the entertainment culture.
yeah,
the
they're
sports
good.
culture.
They're much better than us
I mean,
at
you know,
kind of getting
there's a
people's
lot
attention.
That you know, we can say here that's kind of really seducing our
Right.
students away from the traditional academic.
So let me respond to that. First of all, as a sociologist, I would 100% concede that this is larger than the school as an institution. It goes into the broader culture. However, I'm a researcher that's interested in schools and improving schools, and schools can do something. Now, I think what exists today is kids come in and they say it's about a credential. It's like, I just want a credential. College is about getting a job. And we do a terrible job of providing a counter narrative, countering and saying, that's what you think. But college and university is not that. You know, college and university is about something completely different. Colleges were started in this country because they were thought to serve a moral imperative. They were thought to be doing these broader things. Most colleges and universities, and the private, all the privates were started by religious organizations. It's only recently that we've pulled back and said, oh, that's not our business to teach about, to tell the kids that they have a responsibility that's bigger than them, that this is not just about them getting a better job, it's about developing these other competencies. You can also do things in your courses. When I realized this with my students, I told you I teach that intro course, I have every week they write a memo responding to the reading in class and then also applying what we're talking about in class to an article they read in the newspaper. And I did that because I found out that none of them were reading the newspaper. They didn't understand that that's what you do as an educated citizen.
I'm wondering how much of this is a fair measure, because some people do get their news from TV programming. You may have people not reading, but they may be watching CNN or C-SPAN or, and to some extent there's also the daily programming.
So we're interviewing the kids today about where they get their news from. It turns out a lot of it's from Facebook, that they see posts and other people's on Facebook. I'm not saying they get no news at all of the world. However, it's very limited. Let me tell you one way to think about it. It's limited. Many of you have heard of that book, Academically Adrift, right? We were worried that we had contaminated our research study by the fact that we were continuing to survey the graduates and asking them about their experiences, but we had written a book that documented these patterns. And we thought, well, we got to test. Maybe we're contaminating the study. This book, it's been in the New York Times. It was in Doonesbury last month. We got to worry here. We contaminate our study. So we asked them a question in our last survey, a test, right, to see whether or not we had contaminated the study. Have you read or have you heard about these 3 books? And we picked 3 books because if we just said one book, they'd say, oh yeah. So we wanted it to test. So we asked them about Amy Chua's The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mom, right? Remember that book? That did the best. We asked about our book, and we asked about a 3rd book as a control. It was a book on Harvard education research, a Harvard book that got no attention at all. And we just put that in as a control. This was very humbling. We came in 3rd, right below the control. 2% said they had heard about it. 0.02, no, point, 0. There were 2 out of 1,000 kids said they had read it. I'm not making this up. And 2% said they had heard about it. And it's them. And then when we asked them about the 3 books, if you have heard about it, tell us your impressions of it. And those responses were also very telling. They were like, yeah, I think I heard about this. Someone posted something about this on Facebook, and I think there's a problem with the measures or something. You know. But it was not like, it's not like, oh, I took this test 3 times and you got me wrong. There was none of that. And so, are they getting news elsewhere? Yeah. But it's limited. It's limited. And it's not enough, I don't think, to kind of form the basis of informed democratic participation.
Do you have any data, or did you want to collect any data that looked at the scores and looked at who was finding employment?
Yeah, so that's where I want to go next. We're just starting to do this. These are not like sophisticated models. The first one is, these are just CLA scores, how they ended up in 2009. The kids with the higher CLA score were less likely to live at home, and they were less likely to be unemployed. Okay? You can also see the same pattern in, we come up with a measure called high engagement growth and low engagement growth. These are measures, did you have, high engagement is they took courses where they read, courses where they wrote, their hours studying was higher, and they moved on this CLA, value-added movement. So it's a little different than where you end up. And the trends are not quite as great, but you see some trends there too. Neither of these are controlled for all other sorts of backgrounds, prior SAT scores and so on, but we're trying to get there in our research. I have a few more slides of what colleges and universities could do, or I could just, you want to, okay, do that.
Yes. After you finished the study and you
Sure.
talked to the kids, did you tell them something about the results of the study to get a reaction?
We haven't fed it back to them in terms of the results.
Our group of people, you know, students.
We have fed it back to colleges and universities who've often invited us out that are talked, you know, to think about this stuff. So what colleges and universities could do? First, we talk about administrative leadership, that you got to change the incentives, like the organizational culture now. I don't know about York, but I do know in higher education in general, all the incentives are towards everything else. And so if you're going to, you know, people are hardworking and well-meaning, but they do what they're incentivized to do. And so you got to change the incentive structures, and you got to communicate. You got to communicate that you care about these outcomes, learning, the quality of education, not just the other things that they communicate about. Part of the problem is that the trustees and so on are asking them to do all sorts of other things. Focus on the bottom line, increase the ranking of the institution by increasing the SAT scores of the kids coming in. That's got nothing to do with learning. That's just about kind of what the kids come in with. Develop plan, you know, measure where it's happening, where it's not happening, develop plans for improvement, work collaboratively with faculty. This is not something that the administration, this is a faculty issue, right? Faculty have say over what happens in the classrooms and the academic program. So this cannot be imposed on people, it's got to happen collaboratively. So, and that goes to kind of faculty leadership. And so here the key is individual and collective. It's very hard to change this individually because you've got the problem where if you're the only one that increases reading and writing, increases demands in terms of studying hours tied to grades and so on, they go elsewhere. So you got to come together as a faculty and do it collectively, or you know, you're going to end up, it's not going to work, or it's going to end up leading to lower enrollments in your class and the talk with the department chair, right, and so on, right? And so it's got to come up with a collective response to that. One thing you can do is high expectations, is to come in and say, you know, I'm expecting this out of you. You know, I don't expect this. I don't care about your background. I don't care about this. I'm expecting this from you. And they will rise to meet those challenges. We know that from K-12 literature, and we know it from higher education literature, and many of you know this from your own experience. Faculty evaluation criteria. Again, this is about the incentives, but how do we have the balance right in our own institution of teaching, research, and service? These are what typically faculty get evaluated on. I don't know what the balance is here. Is that right? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but you should have a discussion about that. More important still, how do you measure this teaching thing? Right now, the way that often gets measured is course evaluations. That is probably the worst way to do it, because course evaluations promote lenient instruction, lenient entertaining instruction. How students evaluate courses tracks with their expected grade. Yeah. People know that. It also tracks with whether or not you give them out cookies when they fill out those things. So you got to measure teaching quality in a different way. It doesn't make any sense. You're incentivizing the exact behavior you want to discourage. And so there are other ways to evaluate teaching. Look at the syllabi. Look at samples of student work. Do peer observations where faculty go in and evaluate the quality of instruction for their colleagues. These are ways, if you're taking teaching seriously, that you'd want to measure teaching, not just not the course evaluations. Last slide here, administrative support services. One, I think you need institutional research. If most of the variation happens within the college, not across colleges, you got to be able to have a measure what kids are experiencing in their courses and whether they're learning in their courses. And if the institution doesn't have that capacity, it's going to be very hard to move the ball on this stuff. Second, teaching and learning services. We're trained as academics to do research. Most PhD programs do little to no training in pedagogy, curriculum, instruction, right? So many people come to teach for the first time, and they've never had any preparation. They're smart people, and they figure, oh, I'm going to do what I like, what I learned, how I learned. But there's no, you know, that only gets you so far. And so teaching it, you know, we need to have kind of some support services to kind of provide some support around that. And then finally, this is the fastest growing area of colleges and universities, student support services. Make sure if you're going to invest in all that stuff, make sure it's aligned with the academic rigor and the student learning you want to see. And if it's not, if it's just about social engagement and keeping the kids in school, you're doing those kids a great disservice. Because the most valuable thing they have is their time. And it's just keeping them in school where they're not experiencing academic rigor, they're not learning, they're not developing the traits that are associated with adult success. You're doing a great disservice to them. So make sure that these support services, if you are going to invest in them, are aligned with kind of the outcomes you want to see. That you can email us, and also this site here, highered.ssrc.org. That's our project website where we've tracked a lot of the critical reviews and popular news on the thing. We published that report on the 4 years of finding. That's available, a PDF for free download. That's under a tab that says something like resources and something. There's a section in there, frequently asked questions and answers about kind of the study, where we try to be candid about the strengths and limitations of what we did. And so feel free to use that as a resource. Actually, we have one question behind you. That's going to be the last question.
Okay, great. First of all, I really regret that most of the administrators left the room for your last question. So Dean Clark and Michelle Hodge will have to pass it on.
Okay.
I have a question. You said that the standard deviation for the CLA is about 180 points.
Yeah.
Then you showed the difference between highly selected institutions and less selective institutions, which is still within, seem to be one standard deviation.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay? But now go to the other end about the debt when students graduate from those highly selective institutions.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, as a parent of a 17-year-old, is it worth the money? But more importantly, what burdens and how does that change their work and life experience coming into the work world with that debt?
Yes.
So that's a, I mean,
Well, I think those are very real questions. Our research doesn't speak directly to that. But I would say, if you were going to be serious about giving people advice on that, and is you'd have to, the learning gains, not so huge difference. The gains in earnings turn out not to be so significant once you control for social background. However, to give people full information, you have to make sure that they know that colleges and universities have other outcomes other than just earnings and learning. For you ready for this one? Marriage. Your marriage market outcomes are actually dependent on where you go to school. It turns out that about a quarter to a third of the people have their mate went to the same school. Now, we get divorced so much that maybe it doesn't, But even then, your networks are shaped by where you're going. And so it's broad, it makes it a hard question. It makes it like, to give people good advice, I don't know, they have to really, but I do think you're absolutely right. It's not necessarily the case that you should just take as much debt as you can, because the better the school, the better your life's going to be. It's more complicated than that. Yeah.
And just before we give a round of applause, because it was wonderful, there is a book up here if you wanted to sign it, because I know you have classes to go to, and we will also still have it in the bookstore. Okay? So I really